Hey guys, in today's video, I want to specifically focus on the state of California, where the polling is at, and just why it's so much more important for these candidates to do well in California in 2020 than maybe past cycles. Now, just to start off, California, they moved up their primary date to Super Tuesday. So this process, we're going to head into the month of February where we have the 4 early primary and caucus states, and those are red on the map, those being Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, as well as South Carolina. And then we flip the calendar over to the month of March. We head into Super Tuesday, which are the blue states, 16 of them. And California has their 416 pledged delegates up for grabs on that key date. Now, to put this into a bit of a perspective, those 4 early states combined to have 155 pledged delegates. So California, one state by itself, is nearly 3 times the amount of pledged delegates that we're going to get in the first month. Now, it's still important to do well in these early states because you want to build positive momentum behind your campaign. You want to get those positive headlines. You want the pundits on TV to have a positive narrative to discuss your campaign. But really, once we get past February and flip over to March, that's when we really start deciding things in terms of the amount of pledged delegates that these different candidates are going to get. All the states that you see on the screen, the blue ones, as well as the dark green states, they combine for around 2,500 pledged delegates, and that is a good chunk. If we scroll down here and take a look at the percentages, well over 50% of the pledged delegates are going to be had in the month of March, in contrast to the months of February, April, May, and June, all combined have less than what we're going to get in that 1 month of March. Now, for a candidate to win at the Democratic Convention on the first ballot without taking into account superdelegates, you need 1,990 pledged delegates, or a majority. Now, if nobody's able to reach that majority, then what they'll do is move to a second ballot, and this is where the superdelegates come into play. Now, if you're a progressive, this is your worst case scenario because the people that tend to be these superdelegates are going to be more centrist, moderate, and establishment in nature in the Democratic Party, so they're more likely to support somebody like a Joe Biden, maybe a Buttigieg, maybe a Michael Bloomberg. It really just depends on who's winning amongst all of the centrists as we head towards the convention. So as a piece of advice or strategy for the progressives in particular, let's just say Warren and Sanders both do fairly well throughout this entire process, and cumulatively, they're able to get past this threshold on the first ballot. What I would do if I was them is whoever was leading in the number of pledged delegates, form a unity ticket where the one who's just behind the progressive who's leading, combine your pledged delegates, try to get above that threshold needed to go on and win on the first ballot. Because I hate to say it, even if somebody like a Warren or Sanders are in first place overall, but they're not able to get that number of pledged delegates needed to get the nomination, I still don't think that they would be able to win the nomination on the second ballot because the superdelegates would push their weight behind those other candidates that are centrist in nature. So hopefully we don't get to that situation because that would be pretty devastating for a democracy. But anyways, let's move over and take a look at California. So back in 2016, essentially, we got a situation where Hillary Clinton was able to win 53% to Bernie Sanders' 46%. Now, you might be thinking, well, California has a reputation as being one of the most progressive states in all of the U.S., but there was a lot of factors going against Sanders. For instance, Hillary Clinton had way more name recognition, which is still an important factor. Beyond that, California was a bit later on in the process than it's going to be here in 2020. So there was this narrative that Hillary Clinton had already won the nomination because she had a ton of superdelegates behind her. And then on top of that, with the pledged delegates that she had already won, there was this narrative that Bernie Sanders essentially had no chance to go on and win the nomination. So that's likely to depress turnout. And then on top of that, California is just like all the other states where you can fall into this situation where a lot of voters, particularly more so low information voters, will cast their ballot for somebody that they know in terms of name recognition more so than somebody that they line up with ideologically or based on the policy. And we can see that here in 2016 where Hillary Clinton was able to defeat Sanders, where in general, as a whole for the state of California, I'd say that they more so align with Sanders on policy than Clinton. But we also even saw this in the 2018 midterms, for instance, in the Senate race, where Dianne Feinstein, one of the most conservative Democratic senators, won her re-election bid in California against De Leon, who was definitely to the left of Feinstein. So California has this reputation as being very progressive and to the left, but it still goes to show you that name recognition is extremely important. Now, going into 2020, Biden is going to have a ton of name recognition, which gives him a good possibility at going on and winning the state But I also think that this time around there is going to be a bit more awareness for somebody like a Bernie Sanders or even an Elizabeth Warren. And we're seeing that in the polling up to this point, where in recent months, it's almost essentially a three-way tie between Biden, Warren, and Sanders, where no matter what poll you look at, all of them are getting above that 15% threshold to be part of the candidates that divvy up those pledged delegates. But beyond that, they're all pretty much in the upper teens towards the mid-20s, or maybe every once in a while you get one candidate who's an outlier in the upper 20s, even breaking over the 30 percentage point threshold. But those aren't quite as common, and all these results are, when you combine them together, relatively within that margin of error. We can see a pretty disastrous number here from Kamala Harris, the Democratic senator from the state of California. She's consistently polling in the mid to upper single digits. And very early on in this process, people thought Kamala Harris was going to have a great shot at going on and winning the nomination, not just because she checks off the boxes of being a bit younger than these top three candidates that we see right now, but also she's a female, she's African American. It's just a situation where all of the identity things lined up. So that's why a lot of people, specifically in the mainstream media, felt like Kamala Harris was going to be tough to beat. But on top of that, they thought her trump card was going to be winning California and all of the pledged delegates that go along with doing well in a state like California. But now she's not even reaching that 15 percentage point threshold, which is a disaster for her campaign. Now, Buttigieg has been polling pretty similar to Kamala Harris overall in California, kind of the mid to upper single digits, but we did get one poll out recently where he jumped up to 14 percentage points. We're going to have to see more polls from California to see if this is just a blip or a trend from Buttigieg going forward. But also, if Buttigieg, if he's able to do well in those early caucus and primary states, specifically Iowa and New Hampshire, maybe that propels him enough to get enough positive coverage to where he can start doing better nationwide. And he's really going to have to. That's essentially the strategy that we're getting from the Buttigieg campaign, because nationally his polling is way below what he's seeing in those early states. And he's just hoping that the free media that goes along with doing well in the early states is enough to elevate his campaign as we work our way towards Super Tuesday, and specifically a very important state like California. But if I had to put money on it at this point in time, it'd probably be either between Warren or Sanders for who I think would go on and win the state. It's really tough to gauge beyond that. Maybe I'd give a slight lean to Warren, but she has been falling back a bit in recent weeks in the poll, so maybe you could also have a pretty strong case for Sanders as he's been moving up in the polls recently nationally. Biden, he's also an interesting situation, because if we look back at 2016, the very well-known establishment-friendly candidate Hillary Clinton was able to win the state. There was a lot more scenarios that were surrounding that particular result that were probably more favorable to Clinton than what Biden's going to have going into California in 2020. So that's probably a situation where if I had to put my own money on it, I'd probably put him just slightly behind Warren in Sanders in a statewide result, but pretty close between all three of them. And if they all break that 15 percentage point threshold, they're all going to get a similar amount of these 416 pledged delegates. So let's just say a hypothetical, they each get a third of this. That's around 140 pledged delegates for each candidate. That's nearly as many as winning all 100% of the pledged delegates from those early 4 primary and caucus states. So that's essentially what I wanted to go over here, taking a look at the state of California, where the polls are at, and just why it's so much more important this time around than what it's been in the past. I appreciate you guys stopping by. Consider subscribing to the YouTube channel, and I hope to see you guys back here for future videos.